Welcome to this talk and welcome back to Professor David Anderson. Professor, thank you for coming back on.
Thank you very much, John, for having me.
Now, Professor Anderson, as you might know, is a lifelong physician, consultant physician, endocrinologist, medical professor, and general polymath with a wide range of interests. So always fascinating to talk to him. Now, the first thing I'd like to do, David, if it's okay with you, is a bit of an update on vitamin D. Is vitamin D deficiency common, and what should people aim to do to optimize their vitamin D situation?
Yes, John. D deficiency is almost universal. It probably is universal in everybody at some time of the year. And in order to optimize it, I take a fairly simplistic view, which is that although naturally it comes from the effect of sunlight, ultraviolet light on your skin, that is not reliable. And since it's inexpensive, it's almost costs almost nothing. By far the best thing is to supplement yourself with vitamin D. My wife and I we live in Italy, where there's actually quite a lot of sun in the summer at least. But we take now regularly year round. Every month, we take the contents of 100,000 unit vial, broken onto a piece of bread, taken with nice Umbrian olive oil, and that is sufficient to give you an average of 3,000 to 4,000 units a day, and depending on the length of the month, obviously. In addition, I take twice a month, I take a capsule of calcifediol. Now, vitamin D itself, or vitamin D, depending on where you come from, it's a unique sterol with a fracture in the B ring, which can only be provided by the action of ultraviolet light on the precursor, 7-dehydrocholesterol. It's also the precursor of cholesterol. So 7-DHC, dihydrocholesterol, can go one of two ways. Now, we were evolved, first of all, our species, in Africa, where the problem is the sun's overhead all the time, and it's very hot, so you're wandering around semi-naked, and the risk is actually sunburn. So native Africans and Asians are born with a pigmentation of the skin to serve as a sunblock. And we moved out of Africa probably 200,000 years ago or more. I may have got the date wrong. To occupy the northern landmass. The north of the equator is where 2/3 of the world's landmass lie. So that means the further north you go, the more you are at risk of D deficiency. Now, actually, a confusing thought is that vitamin D is called a vitamin, implying that you have to have it in your diet. It's also called the sunshine vitamin, which for obvious reasons. But you can get it from fish. But obviously fish haven't evolved to be eaten by us, and they may have been evolved to be eaten by other fish. They get their vitamin D from plankton, and it evolved over 1 billion years ago in the surface of the ocean. I think David Grimes mentioned this on an earlier video. It evolved actually to protect the plankton as a sunblock for them. And then with evolution of more advanced creatures, fish started to eat it and evolved a vitamin D receptor. And this unique sterol. It's unique because it's uniquely flexible, and this is explained in our book. It's the vitamin D receptor actually acts along with vitamin A or retinol, which also has a receptor, and the two act in concert to control 3% or about of our genome. That's about 1,000 genes. Now, I think the most recent function that's evolved is control of blood calcium and calcium absorption in the gut. So one confusing thing is to think of it purely, vitamin D purely as a hormone. What happens when you take vitamin D or you're exposed to the sun in summer? Vitamin D is formed, it's absorbed into the skin, or if you take it by mouth, it's absorbed into your lymphatics. It's fat soluble, and it travels in the blood and gets one hydroxyl group added in the 25 position. So it's now got two hydroxyl groups, an original one in the 3 position and one in the 25 position. And that is called calcifediol. And that is the blood reservoir form for all uses of vitamin D. And so you must have a level. I argue that and pointed out extensively that just relying on what is necessary for its hormonal function, which obviously is very important to control ionized calcium levels in the blood, otherwise you get cramps or you freeze, you can't fight or flight or fight or fly. But that is a function which has evolved to be controlled by another hormone called parathyroid hormone. And actually parathyroid hormone monitors the calcium and will drive the system in the event of you having very low levels of vitamin D. All of it will be consumed to control your ionized calcium. And if there isn't enough, then you get rickets and osteomalacia. Now, we have an organization or a committee in the UK called NICE, which I think is absolutely ridiculous, their proposal, but it's also supported by a whole lot of people who should know better and realize that 400 to 600 units of vitamin D a day is not enough for all the other functions. You need to multiply that by 10. You need to go up to 4, 5, or 10,000. You can multiply it by more or less whatever you want because it's very, very safe.
So you take 100,000 units a month and you're absolutely fine with that. There's no adverse reactions from that, and that maintains your blood levels.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, as I said, I take an extra 2 calcifediols a month, or one every 2 weeks. But equally, and I would recommend this for people who are overweight, very overweight. I mean, I'm probably slightly overweight.
Aren't we all?
You know, actually obese. Yeah. Because vitamin D itself is fat soluble, it'll get sequestered away in your fat, and therefore you're at more risk of D deficiency. So something to do is we should be getting much more calcifediol out. I wouldn't recommend taking the active form. I should have mentioned earlier, I didn't, that calcifediol is called upon by all the tissues that need vitamin D, like especially your immune cells, but almost every tissue in the body has vitamin D receptors.
And certainly all of the white blood cells have it.
Absolutely, and they've got a very complicated and very highly organized mechanism for controlling their own local needs of vitamin D, which as we discussed in an earlier video, it's a complex mechanism, and I would hope anybody who wants to learn more about it will download a copy of our book downloadable from our website, dgreatbiologyreset.com,
Links will be
and you'll
provided.
see. And the title of the book, incidentally, is intentionally playing games with the Great Reset of Klaus Schwab and other people trying to control the world. Because what they're trying to do,
I suspected that, David, I must say.
it's not obvious at all, is it? Anyway, so the Schwabian Gatesian model, which is, in my opinion, it puts vitamin D deficiency right at the center of the current plans, which some of them, not all of them with this Christian name of Bill, but one certainly is intent on reducing global population. There are apparently too many people around. There are certainly too many people with far too much money, but they intend to get rid of the ones with no money and therefore no value, like you and me.
Well, we don't want the place overrun by useless eaters, David, do we? I mean, you know.
That's what I'm not sure who said that first, but you just said
they just lie around consuming food, living, being happy, falling in love, getting married, reproducing. What's the point of all that, you know?
Well, it certainly seems pointless if you're a born psychopath, because one of the features, one of the joys of being a human being a mammal actually. I mean, our cat shows the same affection. You know, she doesn't see in my distress her own distress, which is what human beings do. But she sees in her distress the need to get comforted by me.
Yeah.
She seeks empathy.
Yeah, I agree completely. You know, what you were talking about there, these things that happened in the ocean, all these mega eons ago, you know, a billion years ago, that this change in eukaryotic algae, and the production of the vitamin D, and the fish and the concentration, all of these things had to happen just right throughout this entire sequence of time. And you know, to me, this is the great majesty, divinity, divinely
inspired. It's the miracle of life on Earth.
Yeah.
Vitamin D, because it controls so much, lies right at the center of the miracle of life on Earth. Whatever your religious or other beliefs are, one has to marvel at just how well biology has worked for us at this particular point in space-time.
Yeah, and it's all working towards this particular point in time, all these things that happened. And if one of these things hadn't happened, no one would be listening to this video. Well, probably no one will listen to this video anyway, David, but you and I wouldn't be talking if all these things hadn't happened at just the right time, very often in just the right place. It's just amazing that we're here.
I think it's even more amazing when you look back at actually the chances of us being here, if one will look back 200,000 years ago, were very low, because look at the Neanderthals, for example, became extinct. We cross-mated with a few Neanderthals.
We did, yeah.
So there are some Neanderthal genes, but I'm, as you said earlier, I'm obsessed with, or very interested in, man's distant past. And
I'm going to come on to that, David, first of all, but I just want to clarify, because a lot of people won't be sure about this preparation here, which you kindly sent me. This is calcifidiol.
Yeah.
Now,
calcifidiol.
Sorry. Now, this is the activated form of vitamin D. So
no, it's the reservoir form.
The reservoir form.
Half-active form.
Yeah. But correct. But that takes a couple of weeks to get produced. So we have this greasy stuff in our skin. The sunlight acts on that. That substance goes to the liver to be transformed into this. And of course, the older we get, the less greasy we get, and the less vitamin D will actually produce from any given amount of sunlight. So given that most people, this is a pure medical question, given that most people have got very low levels of vitamin D, Do you think NICE protocols should be changed so that when people get acute infections such as sepsis, as well as giving them antibiotics, we should top up the calcifidiol, because this will work within a few hours, won't it, to optimize the function of the white cells?
Absolutely. I mean, that is absorbed over hours because it's got one more hydroxyl group on the 25 position. Hydroxyl means water soluble. And so that's what should be taken. And I mean, I have written in the book, or hinted at, no more than hinted, there is a conspiracy going on against vitamin D. It's not, you can't get any money from the Unmentionable Foundation, from the Wellcome Trust, or any of these people for working on vitamin D. In fact, I mean, an enormous amount of work has been done, which clearly shows, and I had retired from medicine, and at the beginning of the pandemic got back into reading up, mugging up on what's on the papers, and it's just overwhelming. You know, it can't be a coincidence that that big pharma is denying vitamin D or just pretending it's not there.
So as a lifelong physician, David, would you say it's in people's best health interests to optimize their vitamin D levels and make themselves vitamin D replete?
Yes. And what you should be aiming for is a level of more than 50 nanograms per mil.
Yeah.
50 to 100. I mean, I've pushed mine from time to time well above 100. Serum calcium is normal, and I take it on its own, actually, because it comes naturally in the sunlight on its own. The problem is we're not getting enough of it, and that way, it's not the only factor you need. The problem is it's the critical factor for two reasons. One, it's absolutely central to how your immune cells function and fight off infections and probably poisons as well. Yes, you need vitamin A, you need zinc, you need other vitamins for K for different functions, but this is one you naturally get. Why not just take a vial once a month? Obviously, don't take the glass in the vial. But, you know, shake it, break it and shake it on a bit of bread. And that gives you background D throughout the year. Cost about €8 a year.
Well, in England, we can't buy these vials, but we can buy 4,000 international unit tablets from supermarkets,
Yes.
which are very cheap. So I tend to take about five or six of those a week.
Yes, the most important thing is actually every so often to check what your vitamin D level is. And by the way, the units are confusing because I mentioned 50 to 100 nanograms, that's ng per ml. But in Britain, we speak of nanomoles per litre. The conversion factor is 2.5. So 50 nanograms per mil equals 125. But it's not sufficient if you're below that. And almost certainly, I mean, another very important factor is that vitamin D, when it acts on a particular cell, it binds the D receptor, switches on whatever genes that cell is specialized for. But it then, having been used, it is destroyed. It's destroyed because it induces, and you don't need a double-blind controlled trial for this. You just need to look at the literature. It always induces its own destruction by stimulating a production of an enzyme called 24-hydroxylase. And 1,24,25 trihydroxyvitamin D does not have an action on the D receptor. It may well have other important actions. I'm not saying that, but it certainly doesn't have the central action.
So vitamin D is a bit like a £5 note in my pocket. Once it's spent, you can't spend it again. It's a single-use molecule. And if we have an
Yeah.
infection that uses up our vitamin D, or if we have certain vaccinations that use up our vitamin D, we need to put more vitamin D in to replace the vitamin D that was used up.
Well, this is the wonderful model of Bill Gates, who's speaking of inevitable further diseases. And God knows there are hundreds of laboratories all over the world working to do what was quite effectively done in Wuhan with the help of American laboratory workers, American scientists,
American money.
and American money, who created what was, it's actually a rather weak bioweapon, because provided your vitamin D replete, it just gives you a nasty cold. But it's got an insert in it which makes it particularly dangerous if you're D deficient. And people have to realize, I would say everybody, I sent a copy of my book to Prince William and said, give this to, show this book to your wife and dad. If whatever they've got, you've all read that there's a bit of cancer running around that family, as there is around every other family, and a bit of sudden death among the elderly.
And there's no question in your mind that your risks of many types of cancer are going to be reduced if your vitamin D levels are adequate.
Absolutely. Certainly the risk of, and for many, I mean, myeloma is one example, but many are actually rendered, but I think there's good papers showing that bowel cancer.
Colon one, definitely, yeah.
You need to push up your D levels. So the studies that need to be done are obvious, and Angus Dalgleish is your expert, and he's already pointed out many problems.
So obvious clinical trials that would be really quite easy to do, supplementing vitamin D, getting the levels above 50 nanograms per mil, which is 125 nanomoles per litre, but getting those levels up there, following these patients up for years. And we are convinced, you, me and Professor Dalgleish, to name but three, and you and Professor Dalgleish are the important ones, believe that would drastically reduce the incidence of new cancers.
Well, it's absolutely vital that this is initiated. And the British health authorities need to boot out people who know nothing about vitamin D, who don't know anything about the science behind it. Read David Grimes's my two books.
Yep.
Because and some of the papers that are there, and just listen to and ask questions. Don't rely on others to tell you the answers.
And David's papers go back to the early 90s. I mean, this book here by David Grimes, absolutely superb.
It is.
Absolutely superb. And we've known this for 30 years. Dr. Grimes did the research. You and Dr. Grimes have written the books. This is not speculative science done by a few people in a hippie commune somewhere. This is mainstream medicine.
Absolutely. And another feature of mainstream medicine, I'm afraid, today, is that it acts in the interests of big pharma. David mentions early in that original book, he's questions very, very strongly the campaign against cholesterol. Which, of course, half the world seems to be taking statins of one kind or another. Cholesterol is an essential component of our cells, and to block it at an early stage with the enzyme way before 7-dehydrocholesterol is criminal, actually. It's a criminal activity, I suppose. Part of my career when I believed what was written in the New England Journal of Medicine and the Lancet, and likewise high-level reliable journals. They were reliable, but they're not reliable anymore for that kind of study, I'm afraid.
It must be a great source of grief to you to see this abandonment of accurate scientific reporting that's gradually deteriorated throughout your career.
It is. It makes one wonder, when the penny finally drops, and what's happening. Unfortunately, the penny is dropping very, very slowly. It doesn't seem to be affected by gravity very much, but it will drop eventually as more and more people die of turbo cancers, and more people, more and more medics turn round and actually start to ask serious scientific questions.
Absolutely. We are completely pro-science, not the science. No one is the science. This is the process of science, which is humanity's quest to understand the nature of the world that we live in via empirical and logical means. And the abandonment and the reduction of that to be replaced by vested corporate interests is just appalling. The prostitution of science is appalling.
And it's also the discouragement of asking questions. People should be asking questions and expecting answers, not saying, I'm not a scientist. I didn't study science, David. This is all beyond me. Sorry. Education has to turn back and say, you have to answer questions honestly. You have to ask them, first of all. There's a famous Maltese doctor called Dr. De Bono, who was a bit of a philosopher. And one of the things he said was the failure to ask questions lies, I can't quote it off the top of my head, lies at the bottom of many of it's one of the main problems with mankind, and it's the fear of being wrong. It's better to ask enough questions for some of them to be wrong than to ask no questions and always be right.
Edward de Bono, isn't it? Yeah. And the mass outbreak of curiosity deficit disorder, it could be some strange transmissible virus that gets into the brain and turns off everyone's curiosity circuits.
Well, or it could just be paid for, because people who are supposed to be the most curious, they were called what did we used to call them? Correspondents or something like that. Journalists, was it?
I remember there is a term called journalists. I can't quite remember what it means now because don't think I've seen many for a long time. But my dad told me about it.
And even when they managed to kill that poor lovely girl, one of the producers in the northeast of England, age 44 with the vaccine, worked for local BBC. Her photograph is shown in our book. Even then, the BBC, which receives a decent sum from Gates Foundation, of the 316 million pounds or dollars paid originally, I think the BBC got, probably only about 10 million or something. But even the Guardian got a decent amount. Actually, I think the Guardian may have got more. But they're paying off people because, and this brings me to a point which I think is very important, and that is the value of money. Money should be a form of barter. It evolved as a form of barter. It shouldn't be that you can do what Gates and Warren Buffett and Mrs. Gates used to do. She's now left the Gates Foundation. And on the ground of something disorder which has been going around in very wealthy people. Accusation, didn't like it. The chap called
There's
You used to
various
have that.
things that have been
Yeah, the
alleged.
various.
They're well, I don't know about these things, David.
No, no, I don't know about them.
No,
But
no, but
but
there has been allegations made, but I don't know anything about them.
but what it has, what but turning back to the value of money and the fact that you can make money just by investing money, if you're clever enough and you've got enough of it, and some people make a profession of this, that means that is very, very dangerous, especially when it's linked to the origins of the origins of the disaster, the world war that we're living in now, which I think could be called World War D3. But it's also
It's a slow motion war, but I think there is one.
there is, and it's against the truth. It's against people who speak the truth. And George Orwell said that the more tyranny advances, the greater life is problematic for those that speak the truth. So we have at the moment, we've got a major inflection point, in my opinion, in this pandemic. It started with a rather innocent little virus, evolved unnaturally in a laboratory from the backbone virus of a horseshoe bat and the head of a virus of a pangolin. And even that wasn't enough. So they're stuck in a thing called the furin site, which was promptly patented by and who owned, and one of them, I've forgotten whether it's Pfizer suing Moderna or the other way around or both ways. It's mind-boggling. So patenting things really has to be properly controlled. And I'm afraid Dwight Eisenhower said famously in his final address, it's worth looking at that on YouTube. What did he say?
Yeah.
He said he was very worried about the increasing power of the military-industrial complex. And he was talking about a country called the United States of America.
I've heard of it. Yeah. So global problem with money to sense ratio and money to ethical practice ratio as well. I'm sure our viewers will give us views on that. Thank you very much for that, David. I want to move on to your recent jolly. I believe you've just had a short holiday to Geneva, have you? Or what were you doing there?
I went with a good friend of mine, Professor Joseph Trito, who lives quite close to us here, to Geneva. I have been to Geneva once before, but it was in the dark and deep in the mists of time. And it was great to see a very good rally of Brits. And I'm afraid a lot of people who'd lost loved ones, people who are suffering from severe damage from the COVID vaccines. As I was saying earlier, the virus itself was relatively innocent, but the vaccines are not vaccines. These are nucleic acid, they're DNA or RNA, and it doesn't really matter much which. There's probably a slight difference. The RNA is back translated into DNA, and these are incorporated into your genome. And you are then coded, you may be, I mean, no doubt, if you've had enough vitamin D when you were injected, maybe this has protected you, but you had a severe risk through this propensity to create your own a nasty protein called the spike protein, which binds to your ACE receptors, clots your blood vessels, and gives you cancer. I mean, it's just, and this is outrageous. These people have to be brought to justice. The people, in my opinion, we should concentrate on the people who invented the virus in the first place. And we've identified 10 people. Anyway, we went on this jolly to Geneva, it's always good to meet people, because most of the people there were coming with different perspectives of the same conclusion. And the problem is we went last weekend because that's the date that the WHO, which is based in Geneva and is under the directorship of a certain Tedros, who has actually been before the International Criminal Court accused of genocide on a previous occasion. Anyway, he runs the, or he probably doesn't run, he probably takes instructions from people with more money than he has, like people running Gavi. He probably...
And maybe various governments around the world, who knows?
Yeah. Well, they've got their hands in the plate, haven't they? Yeah. Taking money. I mean, I'm sorry, but you just look around. There's so many people being because of this enormous gulf between the very rich, the top 1%, and other people. You know, for me, or for someone in, just starting off a career stay, £1,000 or £2,000 or 5 or 10 would really help with the mortgage, wouldn't it? You know,
it certainly would.
And it gets your wife off your back, or gets your husband off your wife's back, if that's what's happening. You know, there's far too big a gulf between and no control of how they spend the money. And now, unfortunately, we have a really serious system, which is, I think, unless it's dealt with quickly, effectively, is going to destroy empathic humanity and leave it to a few psychopaths with lots of money.
Sounds like you're describing a new potential dark age, I'm afraid, David, doesn't it?
Well, it's up to us to switch the light on before it's too late.
Absolutely.
And I mean, this is mankind has been threatened before, but never, as far as we know. I mean, obviously, wars threaten people, wars threaten individuals, but there's never been a man-made threat to humanity, but there is now, I fear.
Yeah, I mean, there are really quite serious threats that we could talk about in the present, but I think we can learn a lot from the past. So we talked before about everything in human history has had to fall at just the right time, at just the right place to get to you and me now. You know, the miracle. You know, I use the term openly. It's a miracle that we're here, and part of that is major major events that happened. I mean, you've been studying an event that was about 12,000 years ago that nearly wiped out humanity. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, my take on it is slightly different from Graham Hancock's, but not much. There was an event which is in the ice core record called the Younger Dryas period. This was at a time when the world was warming, and it was probably warming because of something that was happening at the center of our galaxy. This is a very interesting author and book, Earth Under Fire, by Paul Laviolette. It's a complex book, and this gentleman is, alas, no longer with us. But he puts very strong arguments about, I mean, he's got very, very interesting theories about the origins of the universe, which kicks the Big Bang theory into touch. But we definitely had our planet, and probably the whole of our galaxy, may have suffered that time 14,000, 15,000 years ago from a massive explosion. That's his argument. But the important thing of this is that whatever this event was, it led to there was this gradual warming occurring, which was melting the ice sheets. And then there was a singular event, and the temperatures dropped down to by 6 degrees to what they had been during the last ice age. And then they shot off up to present levels, and they're fiddling around now. It's got nothing to do with CO2. CO2 is a wonderful gas upon which we're dependent because we breathe it out, and the plants that we eat consume it and recycle it. Anyway, this event, I just a little sidetrack, because when I was based in Hong Kong, I found that there's a lot of really interesting ancient jade and agate carvings from a unique culture, and I've written a book on this, which people can access or can look at on Graham Hancock's blog. It was Book of the Month in February 2018. And I studied this. I mean, I'm quite good at hijacking laboratories, and managed to do some quite serious studies. Then I found that there was also a form of glass, which I've pretty well proved was a meteoritic origin glass. So I then started to look at for impact sites in China. This is in a northern Chinese culture. And this is actually, if anybody's interested, they can go on to Graham Hancock's blog, type in Anderson D2, because this is a second article I put there, and have a look. But turning away, the question of what else happened, as you said, our path to where we are now has been very, very tortured, very, very interesting. But what else happened was that over in America, there was an explosion under the ice sheet. And there's a retired scientist called Antonio Zamora, who's written books on this, well worth reading, talking about the origin of the Carolina bays, which are elliptical bays on unconsolidated ground all the way down the east coast of the States and over in Nebraska. And they all point back. They all point back at one point, which is Saginaw Bay, which is a ton off Lake Huron. So my question is, rather than a direct impact on that of a comet, is it possible that actually a fragment of my impact, for which I have a certain amount of evidence, went suborbital, landed on the ice sheet, just a little tiddler, only about 100 meters across, you know. But so it doesn't destroy the ice sheet, it just goes through. What's under the ice sheet? The answer is enormous amounts of crystalline methane in the form of methane clathrate. So my hypothesis, linking these two events, is that this may have been, in fact, one event started in China. The Chinese weren't involved, but then led to this massive explosion, which was serious. It destroyed a people in North America called the Clovis people. I'm sure they didn't call themselves that. And many of the megafauna on the continent.
Yeah, because there used to be huge animals all over the place, wasn't there?
This was also supplemented. This is why it's worth reading, definitely worth getting into La Violette's book, because he's not aware, I think, wasn't aware of, he's dead now, but he clearly wasn't aware of Antonio Zamora's evidence for an explosion under the Laurentide ice sheet. But he mentions that at the warming up period, there were massive floods, and the floods over, causing Dry Falls, Montana. Randall Carlson is well worth looking up, and all of this is discussed, or much of it's discussed by Graham Hancock. But obviously, I have a vested intellectual interest in linking these events. But it's very odd. Another very odd thing, bringing us back to denial. Denial, it's more than just a river in Egypt. It's ubiquitous. The denial that we have in China over the Hongshan culture, because it was a carving culture. They used religious carvings, jade carvings, then these glass carvings to control people. Presumably the shamans, there was a whole religious culture around this. And it clearly doesn't reflect well. This was probably way before Warring States. So, it's sad, but interestingly, the glass, I mean, I really need to get back to China, or at least get someone to find where the glass is being quarried, because it still is. If you look at the link on that article I've written, you'll see there's films of this stuff being great chunks of red glass being sliced with electric saws, then sliced across, then chipped away, then finalized, carved into silly glass balls. I mean, they're big, they're that size, some of them. And they're just, they're nice toys, but they're not actually doing they're not doing any sculpting with this.
Yeah. So this meteorite event would have vitrified the sand. It would have caused glass, and it would have thrown lots of stuff up into the air, presumably. So would there have been would the sunlight have been, the Earth would kind of go dark for a period of time?
What I'm arguing is that that part, they labeled the twin craters that you can see on Google Earth, and the reference is given and picture images are given. The twin craters, they're tiddlers really, 4 and 5 kilometers across, separated by 1 kilometer, and there's a volcanic ridge. But it's on a volcanic, that part of China is subject to rifting, which means being pulled apart. If you pull the crust of the earth apart, you get magma rising to, under the crust. So a relatively small, a 1 in 100,000 impact, like I'm postulating, which happens every 1 in 100,000 years, but this will be a unique event happening just to really a Goldilocks event that led or contributed to the extinction of these massive mammals all over the world. These two events, the earlier warming, the cooling, and then the sudden rise in temperature afterwards, led to a further catastrophe of massive floods. Sea level rises overall of 120 meters. And this is, we're talking now about some people saying, well, we're really at risk of CO2. So what are they doing? They're flying aircraft spraying chemicals. I mean, you look out in the sky all over England, all over Italy. There are these chemtrails. You can tell they're not contrails, not the trails of high-flying aircraft at 36,000 feet. These are happening at 10,000 feet, and they're being sprayed. And there's an agreement between Italy, apparently, and the USA to do this. God knows why. I mean, it's absolute madness. And of course, that is going to contribute to a drop in vitamin D levels. They do it when the weather's good, which is when you need the sunlight. You need to get out in the sun. It's complete madness, and I'm afraid it has to be stopped. And a lot of the blame, the blame is all over.
You certainly don't want geoengineering of the planet. I think the ecology of the Earth is well designed without humans tinkering on with it.
Yes.
Yeah. So lots to learn from the past about the future. And also, of
Well,
course, if it
yeah.
had been lack of sunlight on the Earth, that would have been a major driver for people to turn white.
Oh, absolutely. Major driver for people to turn, in your case and mine, off-white.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
you really have to avoid the sun to go totally white, John. You obviously cheat and get out and do some digging in the garden from time to time.
I do a little bit on the
But
allotment, yeah.
but another interesting feature and something worth bearing in mind is that something like 8% of our genome, that is 8% of our genes,
Yeah.
are actually retroviral in origin. Now think about that, and think about the fact that we have been subjected to impacts. I mean, mammals, since the dinosaurs were wiped out by a real big one, a 10-kilometer diameter impactor that 69,000 years ago. The next
69
big,
million years ago.
sorry,
Yeah,
69 million years ago.
yeah.
The next mega impact, the next mega extinction of really big animals happened 12,900 to 11,000, somewhere around that years ago. And Laviolette in his book mentions and shows maps where there are islands in Siberia and off the coast of Alaska, which are very top of the world, so they're very close together, that consist of the bodies of mega animals like mammoths and saber-toothed tigers, and then I mean, with tusks sticking out of the debris. So the flooding, undoubtedly there was some massive sudden floodings. I suspect that there's a very big one, and a lot of extinction occurred at the beginning of this. But we don't know. It may well be that when the flood came along, which wiped out probably, Plato was probably right that there was a massive flood and a place called Atlantis, which was destroyed. All denied, of course, but there's quite a lot of evidence if you look at it to suggest, and that there certainly must have been massive tsunamis created. As soon as when you get these massive ice waves, entering oceans, they would cause massive tsunamis on the other side of the Atlantic.
Interesting
So
stuff, and lessons to learn. And of course, we are in another mass extinction now, really. The amount of animals that have gone extinct in the past
we
100 years,
are, we are.
and the sheer unpredictability of the reduction in the genetic variation on the planet. We simply don't know
Yeah.
the effects this is going to have.
Well,
And
one sort of parenthetic thought, maybe to start to conclude with, is the story of the pangolin, because the pangolin and the bat have been selected by the laboratory because they are intrinsically D deficient. And that means that they have to live with retroviruses. That's why you get these retroviruses from bats and pangolins. Now, the chances of a pangolin meeting a bat are actually square root of bugger all, I would say. And but it's interesting. Bats have evolved with a single genetic abnormality in a protein called Cas1 or something like that. And that means that their response, they do not attack. They don't mount an inflammatory response against retroviruses. They've learned to live with them. The pangolin, interesting, does the same thing. The pangolin underneath the scales is vitamin D deficient. It's also vitamin A deficient, probably because it just lives off ants in the dark. But interestingly, of the pangolins are major, there are 8 species, I think, and all under threat. And they're under threat because their scales are ground up and probably dried. Well, they must be dried, probably in sunlight. They will be loaded with 7-dehydrocholesterol, loaded with it. And so this is number one patent, number one medicine for all kinds of conditions in China. It would save the pangolins, I think, if the Chinese if someone, and maybe I should do this, should look at how much vitamin D there is in pangolin scale.
Yeah, much abused creature, the pangolin, unfortunately.
Yeah, very sad.
For one of the lovely innocent creature, and people eat it, drink its blood, and all sorts of horrible, horrible things.
Well,
No scientific justification whatsoever.
Yeah, I think they do keep them as pets too, because they're so docile.
Mm.
But I mean, it's just an interaction of the story of vitamin D and health, and the pangolins are right at the intersection.
Yeah.
Poor thing, happened a sick pangolin with its own coronavirus, happened to be experimented or virus cultured by and people from all over the world who should be held responsible for their part in creating a bioweapon virus, which was then exploited by a whole series of patents using on the same insert. I mean, just appalling, and heads have to fall. There has to be a reconciliation of other people who are innocently called on through collective stupidity, but it's crunch time. And the WHO, with their decision to grant powers to what is now the Bill Gates Foundation, effectively, because his wife has realized that
well, she's no longer there for whatever reason.
She's no longer there. They have to be brought under control. I'm not advocating heads actually roll, but certainly locks and keys need to be turned in some of Her Majesty's prisons. His Majesty's prison.
His Majesty, yeah. So I think I'm going to close just by recapitulating one thought. We're under threat of a new dark age, but we have the options to turn the lights on. And it's up to us whether we do that or not.
It is. But one thing, a thought bringing back to vitamin D, if people who know anyone who has a relative or they themselves have been damaged by, almost certainly by the vaccine, pseudo-vaccines, not the virus, but either. First of all, you must get your vitamin D level measured. And secondly, since it can do you no harm, get it up there between 50 and 100 nanograms per mil and keep it there forever and know what it is. Because that, and spreading that message around for no-vax people like me, that is a potent point of contact.
Go to the doctors, get your vitamin D levels checked. Absolutely. Totally
download a copy of the book or give him the link to download one.
Yeah, we'll give people the link to the book. Generously available by Professor Grimes and Professor Anderson and Dr. David Grimes. You can get your own copy.
Hard copy you do have to pay a bit for.
Yeah, you pay for the hard copy, but you can download the PDF, which is.
But you just it's and any proceeds will go to the Natural Immunity Foundation. Mm-hmm. There was very little mention. Only my friend Joseph Trito mentioned natural immunity in this on the podium. I tried to say so, but natural immunity before artificial immunity if we do that and make sure that you don't vaccinate anybody against anything, especially not a child, until you know what their vitamin D level is. And then very sparingly, and that's argued quite extensively in the book, how much vaccination, what do we need to proliferate the vaccines? The number of vaccines now, if you live in California, the number of vaccinations has gone up from something like 8 for a child, to 60, more than 60 for every child. You know, respiratory syncytial virus, come on, just get real. You know, what do we have? Monkeypox, monkeypox. Bill Gates, by the way, polio is now the major cause of polio paralysis in the world is vaccine polio. Okay, it's modified live virus.
The oral vaccine.
Oh, so yeah. So what's Bill Gates' bright idea? To create a new vaccine against the vaccine variant.
Yes, it rather goes on and on, doesn't it? But
so
anyway, important things for people to think about, David. That was fascinating.
Thank you very much.
And keep on what you're doing. But for now, Professor, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, John.